With your host, Adrian Younge.
For me, eating is a very personal act. I don't even eat around people I don't like because I enjoy eating. It's not just about survival for me, it's symbolic of my identity. It's a shared experience as well as a psychological one. I remember before I had any disposable income, I would never pay more than $20 for a meal. And as I became older and more established, my diet became consumed by my evolving lifestyle. I no longer ate cheap fast food as my life became consumed with this sectarian concept of quality or quality in life or just being dope based on what I defined as dope. Stratification based on personal perspective and character, in sharp contrast to just merely flossing for props of respect. I became a new me for me. This new and distinguished Adrian Younge refined his look, stopped wearing sneakers and rocked a suit every day. My name brand clothes no longer had to have the name on the outside because my illness became internalized. My vocabulary, my vernacular expanded to reflect this new perspective, my new uniqueness. And as a firstborn American child to my immigrant parents, I would ultimately be carving out a different path for my Black awareness, my Black consciousness in this foreign land. So with age, I was molding myself into who I always wanted to be, and this perennial fluctuation was and still is very focused. It's focused because identity, something most of us are still searching for, is something that is very important. It's our self-esteem. It's why we wake up in the morning. My question for you listeners is whether you have found your identity. Where are you on your journey? Are you on your first chance, your second, your fifth? Have you realized that you have an entire life to work on being the best version of yourself? If you are lost, and I told you that food can help you find your way, your knee-jerk reaction may be to call me an idiot. But my next guest may beg to differ. He has used food as a way to exemplify his uniqueness and perseverance as a minority chef that takes pride in giving back to his community and to the world. With food, he has healed marginalized communities, inspiring people to overstep socioeconomic obstacles with culinary dismounts and action. Anthony Bourdain stated that my next guest first changed the world when he elevated the food truck concept from Roach Coach to highly sought after, ultra hot yet democratic rolling restaurant. Please welcome the entrepreneur, author, social activist, the rebel, my friend, and inspiration to me as well as many around the world. My brother, the chef of all chefs, Mr. Roy Choi. How are you doing, man?
Oh man, thank you. That was deep. It's really great to see you, Adrian. I haven't seen you in so long. Could be 3 to 5 years, somewhere between there, because I was running the hotel in Koreatown.
Exactly.
And you were just kind of starting your movement at that time.
Yes, man. I appreciate it, man. And, watching everything that you've done and have been doing is just so important. And it's really interesting to me because as we become older, we realize this duty that we may have to make life better for other people as we're making life better for ourselves. And I feel like nobody really epitomizes that more than you. And you've given hope and created so many opportunities for people of color with the aim of vitiating the negative stereotypes and rhetoric that have subjugated so many people. How have you done this and why?
Oh, wow. I think that the best way I could describe it is that it's never coming. I guess there's a couple things. One is I have a field and a profession and an expression and I guess like a creative art that is made to nourish people. You know, your music and you're nourishing souls and ears and ideas and pathways into other consciousnesses, you know. My form is the actual tangible nourishment. So when as I've gotten older, as you speak about getting older, I've gotten to a place where I've been able to narrow the gap between, I guess, reality and what I really see through my third eye. And I've realized that this is fundamentally who I am. I'm on this planet, I believe, to take care of people, to never discriminate on who has the access and the ability to eat. So that's the core. But then all of my upbringing and what I went through in life has just only contributed to that. And what I mean by that is I grew up, you know, on the streets. I grew up in the neighborhoods. I grew up with friends. And I've never looked at what I'm doing now as some form of charity or some form of some higher thing helping, you know, something lower. These are my friends. These are my family, you know. And so for me, the lens is always like, if I have food and the rest of my family doesn't have food, what the hell am I doing with the food? You know? And so through that lens, it's just become about feeding humans. And it's led me to I guess a little more of a higher thought of a lot of the inequities and injustices and separations that we have here on Earth are because of our lack of access to food and our deliberate poisoning of many communities with food. You know, food is not the sexiest thing to talk about because it's much easier to talk about things that you can see the direct effects of, whether that's drugs or alcohol, tobacco, sex, whatever. You know, these things that are extremely apparent. You can see there's an immediate factor of destruction in there. But food takes a long time, right? So if you start feeding children, teenagers, young adults, just processed sugars and foods and preservatives and chemicals their whole life, you may not see it when they're 19 or 20. And not just physically, but also mentally and spiritually. You may not see it, but you'll see it later on and it catches up, and it's something you can't fight. Once it catches up, you can't put it down. You can't fight it off.
What do you define as it? What do you see?
The it of everything is that we have a fundamental problem with our culture towards eating in America. We're a very young country, right? Only a few hundred years old compared to other civilizations throughout the world that are thousands of years old. Although we're a very young country, we're a very stained and tainted country, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. From how we started, how it was built, and all of the policies and politics and lobbying and backdoor deals that have been done to destroy communities and keep wealth, right? So along with all of that strategy from the power down to the people that has been used to separate and to subjugate, food is one of the most fundamental things that's in there that we don't talk about. And what the it is that through food, you can control that narrative. You can control that separation and that power structure. Because what you're doing is basically you're poisoning people. You're poisoning people without them knowing that they're being poisoned through processed corporate food, through sugars, through all of these things that are forced into communities that can't afford, or that the choices that are available in communities are only carrying these products, you know?
That's deep, man.
Yeah.
That's very deep, because I could say to you, well, obviously you're talking about the concept of white imperialism, right? That is derivative from our slaveocracy. I could say to you, well, they have access to the same food that we have access to. But what you just said about where the processed food goes, obviously you could find processed foods in, the same neighborhoods. You could find processed foods in Beverly Hills. You could find processed foods in South Central. But the access is different. And one of the things that I've seen you talk about a lot is a concept of organic foods in the inner city. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, a lot of it, Adrian, what you're touching on is that, again, it's about control. It's about who gets the dollars, what the narrative is, what the story is, and the blatant belief that people are not smart enough. Whoever's in control to believe that they, especially minorities and people of color, that aren't yearning or their bodies and their spirit and their soul are not yearning to have better things, right? And then so you double down on that as a control mechanism to keep people sequestered and imprisoned. Not just figuratively, but literally.
Yes.
With the lack of resources, with the food programs that are offered within our public schools, that none of it is filled with anything organic or filled with vitamins. It's all, again, processed frozen hamburgers, pizzas, hot dogs, puddings, and jellos and things like that. Then you move to the architecture around it, the design and the access. Then you don't have any stores that carry any of this type of produce or, grass-fed, natural, organic meats or sustainable meats. Then you move on after the school system and you go out into the job market. There's no economy to support any sort of spiritual growth from there. And then what happens is a lot of our brothers and sisters get funneled into the prison system. And then you get into the prison system, and it's just a mirror image of the public educational system. Everything trapped.
So something that's very interesting to me is how you have this panoramic view of this system and how you have used food to give second, third, fourth, fifth chances to these people that have been defined as recidivists. How has food given people opportunities to live again?
Food is the essence, Adrian. It's okay. So I come from a culture, obviously I was raised in America, but my family is from Korea. Right. In a lot of cultures in Asia, for example, food is the fundamental thing. Even if you're poor or rich, it doesn't matter. You all eat the same food. You all eat vitamins and vegetables and fruits, because these foods aren't just looked at to fill your hunger. They're also looked at to give you minerals and vitamins and activate your brain and open your mind, help your circulation system, help your organs. These things that we eat are a part of our fuel, and if the fuel that you're constantly putting in your body has no nutrients, eventually something is going to happen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's going to be a push comes to shove type of situation. And that's what's happening in our bodies in America, is that because we haven't built a culture around food, because we don't respect a lot of our citizens in the same way, because we don't fundamentally believe that feeding children, even I'm not even talking just about marginalized communities. I'm talking about all of America. We have children's menus. The rest of the world doesn't have children's menus. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
But we have children's menus where we take our kids and we feed them chicken tenders and pepperoni pizzas from the age of 1 or 2, and just while the parents or the adults are eating all this fancy food, you feed your kids and you raise them on these salt-based, sugar-based, diets that are just, once you maximize that to 11 from an early age, how are you going to expect those human beings to drift back towards subtleness within shoots and roots and sprouts and vegetables and fruits and all these things? Because how can you? And so the fundamental thing for me is that the reason why I use food, the reason why I'm so active in everything I try to do, is because I truly believe, my philosophy is that all equality begins with food. Because if everyone can access great food and can access the nutrients in food, then what happens is everyone can fully develop in many ways, in at least one facet at the same rate.
Something in addition to that, that is a big part of your brand, is how the kitchen is sanctified, and it provides opportunity. It's like a level playing ground for people, because you are an entrepreneur because of the kitchen. You're a minority person that's been giving a chance after you were trying to find your way as a teenager, you went to like military school and all that stuff. And you went through your addictions and all that stuff. And when you did your Kogi truck, you was just trying to make some money.
Yep.
Right?
We were in front of the club at 2 a.m. trying to make money we could put in our shoebox, I was fired. A lot of my partners were out of jobs. We were just trying to get by till the next thing came around, But in the kitchen is one of the most beautiful places. And especially fundamentally, it's one of the most beautiful places because it just comes down to skills, Yes. It's almost hip hop in a way. Just comes down to skills. It's almost like b-boying because it doesn't matter your race, your color, where you came from, your age, your gender, your sexuality, anything. Can you peel those potatoes? Can you cut those greens? Can you work 3-4 pans at the same time? Are you willing to be a part of this team? And that's all that matters. What you're finding when you get to a kitchen, if you're lost, you're finding a lot of folks that were lost themselves. And so there's camaraderie there. But on a deeper scale, I feel that if we go back again to the inequities, another big inequity is the job market. Okay, so not only are we poisoning people from an early age, not only are we creating separation and lack of access, not only are we not offering organic fruits and vegetables within neighborhoods that need them the most, but we also aren't offering any jobs. And even if there are jobs, the qualifications to get into a job, a lot of the communities don't have it because of the systems that didn't allow them to access those things, right? So, this is all stuff you already know. In the kitchens that I try to run, we don't have an application paper. We have name and phone number. That's it.
That's so dope.
That's it. Name and phone number. I don't care who you were before you got here. It matters who you are right now.
So that's so dope. And going back to your own story, man, like I remember, I've been DJing years here in Los Angeles, and my homie Scott Sanders, who was director of Black Dynamite, I remember around that time, he was like, yo, you got to taste these Korean tacos. I was like, that sounds stupid. I'm like, that sounds dumb. It's like, why I want to eat some Korean tacos? And it's interesting because I'm 42 years old. Mm-hmm. First time I had Korean barbecue was 2008 when we were creating Black Dynamite. And it was one of the illest experiences I ever had. And Korean barbecue is like my favorite food, right? So Scott, who's the director of Black Dynamite, it was like, yo, you like Korean barbecue? I put you up on it. Taste these tacos. I was like, whatever, dude. So one day, because you couldn't get it in the daytime. Yeah. I remember I drove to a bar off of Washington. And Koji, it was like, I think it didn't open till like 5:30 or 6. I know the bar started with an A. I don't remember what it was called.
It's the Alibi Room.
Exactly. So I remember going there and he was with me and he was all excited because I'm hearing all these long lines of people waiting for this damn taco. I'm like, all right, whatever. Yeah. I get the taco and I'm like, bruh, this is ridiculous. I loved it so much. And
thank you.
This epitomized a crazy transition that I didn't fully realize until last week when I was with my daughter. I was driving with my 16-year-old daughter, and I saw a food truck that looked like it was probably made in like later 80s, early 90s. Yeah. And when I looked at the truck, I said to my daughter, I was like, yo, that's crazy. I see that truck and I'm not inspired to eat on that truck because I remember that these were just looked at as roach coaches, basically. But then from the time of Kogi to now, you have all these trucks with graphics on them. And it's the production value that added to it. And then there is now this mystique that emanated from what you did with the Kogi, because we're all hip hop. After the hip hop spots, we go into the trucks getting all this food. And then it all turned into this big industry now where these trucks are arguably more captivating than the actual storefronts that they're nearby. And that's something that you really pioneered for Americans, but this is minority driven.
Yeah. The soul of it is many ways the trucks that you were mentioning in the beginning of your story. Because you got to remember the history of taco trucks in LA comes from the Latino community here.
Absolutely, yes.
And a lot of these trucks weren't designed for the larger, population of Los Angeles. They were for the neighborhoods. They were for the communities. The other sector of the trucks were for construction. The thing about Kogi was we always looked at ourselves as the children of these trucks because we come from this culture and we grew up on these trucks. And for us, the only difference that we had was that, again, we were like the children of immigrants. We were able to speak English. We were able to utilize technology. We were able to express ourselves in a free way that maybe our parents or our grandparents couldn't, because they just had to put their head down and be quiet and do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What we try to do is take the soul and the lineage of what they laid down, and some of the the hate and vitriol and stereotypes that they had to endure, and we tried to flip that on its head, right, and show the beauty to the world. And all it needed was the perfect storm, and it needed the perfect storm of the economy crashing, technology rising, and a group of folks that lost everything and had the ability to translate what we are feeling, I guess, to America,
Yeah. So my record store, salon, my studio, I'm in Highland Park, and on York Boulevard over here, a couple blocks from here, there's so many trucks and there's so many taco stands in this area. Now, one thing that's really great about what you've done with your dialogue, with your rhetoric, with your businesses is that you've helped the business of so many poor Latinos in my area in Southern California actually be able to make a living and not be hampered on by the police for selling tacos to the same degree as they were before Kogi. You made street food more accepted, and that has given people opportunities. That has kept some fathers and some mothers out of prison because they're having an opportunity that they didn't really had before. You guys helped to bring the white people over to accept the fact that we could eat on the streets and we could support our own people.
And it shows I really thank you for that. And I really believe that if there is anything that we did do, it is that. It's not that we became, the carriers of this culture. We are just one piece of it. But what we did do is we did crack open the consciousness, I would say. We were able to let people get past their ignorance.
Absolutely.
Presenting it we were presenting the same exact thing. Kogi is street to the core, but we were presenting it in a way that became universal. And once people could get past their ignorance and their stereotypes of it and just see the beauty in it, then what happened is it kicked off a chain of events. Not only did they start to explore other trucks that maybe they had looked at a certain way before, not only did it provide opportunities for not only people of color, but also entrepreneurs to leave their jobs and start a whole new life, but it also inspired people to get more into food. Because what Kogi was in 2008, it was a bridge, because the food world, again, was very segregated. You had fine dining, and then you had what was considered great food, which again was very hard to access or highly expensive or not affordable. And then you had fast food in many cases. And what Kogi became was a bridge to, I guess, make food kind of pop cultural. in a way, so that everyone can look at it and say, you know what? I never had asparagus before, but because of Kogi, I'm going to try asparagus. And that bite of asparagus leads to real Parmesan cheese instead of the canned Parmesan cheese. Then that opens up a whole thing. Then all of a sudden you learn about pasta. You learn about all these things that you were raised on the processed version of. That changes everything.
I didn't realize how good vegetables were until I went to Israel and ate fresh. I could not believe it, bro. But, you know, I wanted to segue into some history here. Okay. You were born in Korea, Seoul, Korea, right? Yeah. And then you and your folks came to America around maybe like around 72 or something. Yeah. What do you know why they came to America?
They have an interesting story. They came twice, actually. They came, they were part of the early wave. One thing we have to remember is that they weren't letting a lot of Asians in before 1965.
Exactly. Because of the quota.
Racism.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a history of racism against Asian. Obviously, we're seeing it right now. And you know, every race and every culture, especially here in America, has to go through their own journeys of this racism. And obviously the Black community has had to go through the most. And now the Asian situation is the flavor of the moment as far as, you know, the political and cultural environment. But this has been going on a very long time. This has been the Chinese railroads.
Absolutely.
Since the internment camps and the Japanese Americans during World War II and the propaganda that was being spread, which is very similar to the propaganda that's being spread now, where these people were dirty, they were a infection, that they had to be rounded up and kept in one area so that they don't contaminate the rest of us. And then that went on all the way to 1965, where you weren't allowed to come to this country. And then finally, when that broke loose, then you saw a lot of Korean immigrants, and through the Vietnam War. Vietnam is another form of racism. Right. Going into someone else's country, using it as a disguise to get, you know, the poppy fields to subsidize our drug problem that was being.
Absolutely.
All this shit is layer on layer on layer. Yes. And so my parents came here. They came as graduate students. They came to study. My dad went to UCLA. My mom went to art school here in LA. They got married. They were young. You know, they did their thing. And then the Asian culture is a very overbearing culture. So even when you become an adult, like the Confucianism, the we call it the Han, the pressures of family, they pull you back. It's like Godfather 3. And so they were like, they tasted freedom, man. They were here. They were here on American soil, and they decided to go back. I don't know why. Decided to go back. I was born over there, and I think they gave it like 2 years, and they're like, fuck this. And so they figured out a plan. We landed here. They left everything behind. They came with no money in their pocket. You know, these are, you know, I know these are stories that you hear. They're almost like fairy tales, but they're true. You know, I can't even imagine that as an American that was raised here with all the, I guess, privileges that they worked hard to give me, like me getting on a boat or a one-way ticket to a country I don't speak the language of with no money in my pocket, like getting off the plane and being like, all right, you know, everything starts from here. So they did that. They came and they did what every immigrant does, you know, work as busboy, you know, dishwasher, liquor store, gas station, things like that. And then we were bouncing around a lot in my first like 10 to 12 years of life. And then my parents, you know, very similar to me with Kogi, they had a miraculous moment in their life when I turned 13, and they got into the wholesale jewelry trade. But it was like a perfect storm for them because the immigrant community had spent about 10, 15 years here building a community, and they were starting to build some wealth. And they found this lane. My mom found this lane, like cut everything just 10% above wholesale. And, you know, so if you're going to pay this much for Tiffany, I'll make the same thing. She was making knockoffs basically. like they became rich overnight, and they moved to the suburbs when I got into junior high.
Because you were in South Central, you were in West Hollywood, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Koreatown, yeah, Koreatown.
Okay.
And then we had this huge shift overnight. So the thing is, but as I look back in hindsight, a lot of that, even though when you're young, you're going through it, you don't want to move, you don't want to leave your friends, you don't want to go to this, all this, I have my own anger and angst towards it all. But now that I look back, I realize it was a part of my destiny, not be from one neighborhood, just hang with one group of people. It was my destiny to experience all these things so that when I became a chef, especially now with Kogi, able to feed and understand what everyone needs at every moment of their day,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
A lot of people don't realize the importance of, because I moved around a lot when I was young. I mean, when I was in elementary, I was in upstate New York in a small town called Canton, where there was literally Amish people on horses, and then I lived in Cerritos. That was the first time I was like around so many different Asian people. I thought I was so dope because I could tell the difference between a Chinese person to a Korean person to a Filipino person to a Japanese person. But my Guyanese parents from South America had no idea what the hell this sagacious vision I had. So like being around.
You from Cerritos?
I went to Cerritos, and I lived in Anaheim Hills next to Villa Park where you guys were, and I was in Fontana. So in a lot of ways, I've been in the same kind of areas that you have been, you know what I'm saying? So I was around all of that, but this gave us this multicultural vantage point where we could understand different people, understand different cultures. We could have meetings with white people, have meetings with Asian people, have meetings with black people, and be ourselves because we understood the cultures. See, and that's something that a lot of people don't get to experience.
And it's being amplified right now, especially in social media, where everything is so binary. Everything is separated. It's like I can't hang out with you. You can't hang out with me because you're black and I'm Korean. And then everything gets grouped into huge groups. Like, if one incident happens, all them Asians are racist.
I want to stop you right there. I want to give the listeners some history and some information because I want to get back to exactly what you're talking about right now. So when it comes to racism and the concept of white imperialism, it's created long-standing rifts that still emanate from the days of slavery, as we know. But there are also rifts created based on how other immigrating cultures, like Asian Americans, came over and assimilated into the fixed or marginalized stratification system that we already had here. It's a very nefarious enigmatic system, and we all hate this. But people have to understand the history and the insidious fermentation process that really brought racism to its forefront. So it's not just whites and or blacks and Latinos. There's this middle area. And for us, a lot of Asians have been, because like I said, this is a stratification. People that are listening don't see that I have this diagram I'm putting up with my hands, but you would have this system where you have, the perspective is that white people are here on top, and then, the darker you are, you're on the bottom, and then Asians serve as these middlemen where they could be on both sides. But I'll get into that in a second. So you were talking about 65 is when things started to change. So in 65, the U.S. quota system was lifted to allow more immigrants into America. That's how my parents came to America. That's how your parents came to America. But what's very interesting is that Korean Americans were brought in at a higher rate because it showed that their assimilation process based on their education levels and their abilities just to be a bit more affluent, they were basically allowed to come in. The selective process leaned more towards Koreans. They were hyper selected. Now, what happened was that when you go to the studies, you could see that this Korean immigrating population felt a kind of racism that they were unfamiliar with back home. And this racism created barriers, but also caused some rifts with blacks and Latinos. Now, one that's interesting is that these Koreans that had different dreams but weren't given the same opportunities, found that they were able to get loans, bank loans at a higher rate than a lot of blacks in the inner cities were, especially here in Southern California. And then what happened was that Koreans were living in the same areas that blacks were, right? But now they were the ones that were opening up the grocery stores, the liquor stores, and all that stuff. So when I say this, it takes me back to 93 from that infamous scene in Menace to Society, right? Where the Korean store owner, the Korean couple were basically robbed after they were racially profiling these two black gentlemen. And I'll never forget the line that the Korean lady said to the black dude, where she was like, "I feel sorry for your mother." After that, he killed them and robbed them. Yeah. And it was one of the most heinous things that you could think about. But this was based on what happened to Letitia Harlan in 91, 13 days after Rodney King was beaten, where a 15-year-old girl was shot in the back of her head from a Korean store owner in South Central after she was allegedly stealing orange juice. So it's interesting to have this talk with you, because being marginalized is not monolithic. There's a dichotomy, because in the black communities, you'll see a lot of these Korean owners and not black owners. And then it's like, well, why are they treating us as, there's all this shit that happens. And you were in South Central. You are as hip hop as you are everything else. You know what I'm saying? Like, so going back to this scene back then, did that resonate with you and your family? Because you guys owned a liquor store, right?
Yeah. But we owned it in Koreatown.
Got it.
But I don't think it had to do with me and my family, but it definitely had a lot to do with me as an individual growing up in Los Angeles and Orange County.
Yeah.
Because a lot of my friends were not Asian when I was coming up until college, and so in many times, I would have to see kind of both sides of the fence in many ways, and I understood both sides of the fence. Not a peacekeeper or a peacemaker, but someone that can in many ways be a little bit of a translator,
yes.
Because we need more translators, because a big fundamental problem in some of those early 90s rifts between the Korean community and the black community, especially here in Los Angeles, has to do with two completely different perspectives and cultures and foundational elements about how life is looked at. Even if you take that line, "Sorry for your mother," however the Hughes brothers decided to write that line, they're looking through the lens of a Korean mother or Korean culture where the only thing that matters is the family, is the kid. So they do anything they can. But because of that one-way kind of tunnel vision, and that's the one thing that I feel, if I could turn back time, that I wish I could have helped some of the translation or some of the healing between what was happening. Because you're talking about two marginalized communities, two communities of color. It wasn't racism. It was just this fundamental difference between, you have the Korean community that's only focused on their children. I came here with no money. I'm going to run this store and I'm going to send my kid to college. That's it. 2, 3. Everything that is around that just becomes a part of the path, right? And what I wish would have happened was, I wish that the Korean community, our community that ran a lot of stores within the black community, would have opened up a little more.
Wow.
Would have not jumped to conclusions, would have maybe even invested within the communities, built community centers or did food drives or whatever the case may be. And the last thing I'll say is the other side of that conversation, of that scene, is you have an American culture that's all mixed up, right? Broken homes, broken families, sometimes divorced families, sometimes fatherless homes, motherless homes. So this concept of family, children, your mother's love, all these things sometimes don't translate the same way and can be taken the wrong way. I wasn't old enough during those times to make an impact, but now that I am an adult, I try to do everything I can, especially in things like local in Watts, in other things with the Kogi truck, in our food.
But hold on, explain, because people don't know what local is. To explain what that is right quick.
Well, local it's many things. It's a healthy fast food restaurant for the community, employed by the community. It's a project that me and my partners did because we were at a stage in life where we had the ability to not just open another restaurant for our own profit and revenue, but it's a human project. It's a humanistic project. You know, as you grow older in life, and you mentioned it in your intro of building some, not just money wealth, but just life wealth, you know, and knowledge, you have the ability to give back, pay it forward. And local is a project where we address the direct problems that exist. There are no jobs, there's no produce, there's no organics, there's no training programs, there's no resume building pipeline for a lot of young kids. And so, and a lot of that starts because the gateway to get in is already flawed. Because how do you gain experience if no one is going to hire you? You know, and so local was a project where can we give jobs? Can we provide nutrition? Can we teach skills? Can we open up an industry that maybe wasn't seen before, that folks can get in and be accepted? And also for me, it was about creating imagery, especially for the youth, because if you have a restaurant that does all the bread from scratch, all the sauces and juices and everything from scratch, and the whole restaurant is employed by the community and is run by the community, and eventually once all the loans and everything are paid off, that the restaurant will actually be given to the community. Then you have kids that are 5, 9, 7 years old walking down the street and seeing their cousin, their aunt, their brother, their mother baking bread. Those impressions inform a new generation.
It's identity, dude.
It's identity.
That concept of identity and self-esteem is so deep. And going back to what we were just referring to, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the concept of the middleman minority as applied to Asian entrepreneurs, where they say, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So basically there's this concept where for the listeners where there's this, you know, it refers to minority entrepreneurs who mediate between dominant and subordinate groups, whereby their customers are typically the members of marginalized race or ethnic groups that are segregated from a majority group. So when you hear this concept, right, what I take from this concept and what I take from local, what I take from the liquor stores and or the grocery stores, right, it's like carving up racism in a way where you're saying, okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an optic where the entire Asian population is a forever foreigner. And that's all they are. They'll never be American. They're just foreign. They're not threatening us in a violent way. They're just foreign. So we can deal with them and we can have them deal with them. And it's like, there's this concept that is part of this nefarious capitalism that we talked about earlier, whereby it doesn't recognize the obstacles that Asian people have to go through in order to actually be successful here in America. And it goes back to this identity thing and what you're talking about as far as family values, you know, and when we're talking about family values, something that I do a lot of reading as far as how the ideology of the Black consciousness in America, especially family values. So there's this concept of drapetomania, where that was a disease that was defined as a disease where when Black people would run away from their enslavers, they're suffering from drapetomania because Black people are destined, they're barbarous creatures that are destined to be controlled by white people.
Yeah.
This was one of the leading beliefs. And then the other one was that it was okay to separate Black families because they're the type of creatures that weren't as familial. So when you're talking about this concept of being a Korean American and working hard every day for your children, we talk about the scene in Menace to Society where the Korean lady said, "I feel sorry for your mother." But then you connect that to what the concept of family means to Black America, the skewed concept. It illustrates a greater point. And what this greater point here is identity. And then I connect that to the work you're doing with food. And you think about how food provides this self-esteem, how food provides this identity, whether it's from jobs and or opportunity. And then now I'm going to jump all the way over to somewhere else where I don't eat chitlins, right? The reason why I don't eat chitlins, or the reason why I never have ate chitlins, is because I said to my mom, I'm not eating that because that's slave food. I said that in my younger days. I wasn't smart enough to understand the identity behind the food. And then you have the food that was given to the enslaved people, which were the scraps, but they turned the scraps into delicacy. And there was a stratification. White people ate this, Black people ate this. We like this, now let's consider this Southern food. The Southern food is based on a lot of the unused portions of the pig. Now this is soul food, now this is Black. Then you have a Muslim population, a Black Muslim population, we're saying, no, we're not supposed to eat that food. Now there are these rifts in the Black community regarding food and identity.
Yeah.
I said a whole bunch of stuff just to come to the concept of identity and how food breeds identity. What are your thoughts on this?
I guess every generation looks at themselves as some sort of having some sort of impact, I guess, on the progression and the lineage of the human race. Interesting, we're in a time now where I feel like this is a very critical and malleable time that can change it. Even if we go back to the immigration we were talking about and the middle minority and the things, I feel like a lot of the pains that had happened before can be changed now moving forward, because we are the children of those immigrants. We are the children of those communities. A lot of times the rift that was happening between the communities was, you're talking about a fundamental language barrier, cultural barrier. You have one community that is going in and keeping their head down, trying to keep quiet, but that's looked at as disrespect. All of that couldn't be explained at a time. And now we're in a time where the children of all of that, we can move it forward. We can explain it. So when you talk about identity, I believe that we have the opportunity to actually create and define our identity. I find it weird sometimes we as Americans, we're always holding on to things when the things that we're holding on to, really, what are we holding on to? We have a country that was built on slavery. We have a country that has been using weapons of warfare to control the whole world and our minds psychologically and our lives. We have a country that is so young that we don't even care about the things that are important to us. You know, we don't even care about feeding ourselves and our children nutritional food. You know, if you really break it down, those aren't things that we put value in. The companies don't put value in it. The capitalism and profit margins don't put value in it. The politicians don't put value in it. The retailers don't put value in it. And so if we don't put value in these things, It starts with food. It goes to design. You know, people have no idea how much design affects a point of view and an identity. If you have great design, that can reflect upon your consciousness and your outlook towards life. It goes into what we wear, fast fashion. You know, we have a culture where we will wear anything as long as we can get it as cheap as possible. You know, not thinking about the ramifications of all of those things that make it cheap. And those things, whether they're sweatshops, human trafficking, slave labor throughout other countries, is the same thing that's reflected in food. There's no way that a bottle of soda can cost what it costs, or a candy bar costs what it costs, and a fruit costs what it costs. It's because of all of the lobbying and subsidies. So we have an identity problem around taking care of each other, in my belief, around caring for one another, and taking the time and the energy to believe that we can be greater. You know, that there are things that are out there. Because you take Israel, like you mentioned, Israel, Italy, any country, no matter how poor the economic situation may be, there is nothing that is going, from an identity standpoint, going to move your belief that you deserve great food. You know,
Right.
I mean, like you take plates in Israel, for example, that are built around chickpeas, parsley, tomatoes, garlic, and herbs. Right? These are fundamentally what the whole dish is. If those 5 things are the dish, your belief, again, from an identity standpoint, why shouldn't every one of those things be the most delicious thing at their most delicious state, at their most nutritious state possible? You know, yeah. And we as a culture and as humans and as caretakers of our own existence, we're going to make sure that those things are grown responsibly, are harvested responsibly, are distributed responsibly and ethically, and are eaten and cooked responsibly and ethically, so that we become more of ourselves and we mushroom into beyond just our physical form.
I totally agree with you. And the last thing I want to get to before we get out of here, because every time I talk to you, I get hungry. I want to talk to you about identity, consciousness, and how this applies to what is taboo. Okay. So in my parents' country, Guyana, there's a dish called black pudding, which is like, you know, pig intestine, cow blood, and seasoned rice and herbs and all that stuff. And I remember growing up, I used to love it, but at the same time, I hated so much Guyanese food because I more so identified with myself as an American kid. I didn't want to eat the curry and roti every day. I didn't want to eat the cook-up rice every day. I didn't want to eat the pepper pot every day. I didn't want to listen to calypso every day. I didn't want to listen to soca every day. Like, I identified more as an American kid. And now that I'm grown up, there's certain foods that I just choose not to eat. It's not because it doesn't taste good. It's just because I don't identify it. And I want to talk about this, the concept of ethnic kinship and what is taboo. So something that you as an expert could really help me out with is the concept of, for example, in America, it's hella cool to eat cow, right? In places in India, that's absolutely taboo because that's a holy animal, you know?
It's a holy animal, but it's also a practical animal because they don't have forestry like we do to burn wood. So they need the cow dung to create fire, you know? So it's this whole cyclical system. Why kill your source? You know, like.
But we look at them as they're crazy. They look at us as we're crazy. But then, how about this though? Dog meat, right? As Americans, we look at that. You know, in South Korea, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, in Nigeria, even in places in Switzerland, a lot of other places, there, you know, it's legal to have dog meat, to sell dog meat. What do you think about the concept of it being taboo or not? Is it right?
Well, the more and more I look at food, especially the way we're farming and slaughtering food,
Yeah.
it's harder and harder to understand our connection with, eating animals.
Yeah.
I understand it culturally,
Yeah.
especially if you're talking, pre-industrial
Yeah.
human race, tribal form, community form. But now you can't use that romantic argument of hunter-gatherer in a modern society like now. As far as the examples you're giving with the meats, it comes down to propaganda, romantic narratives, of
Right.
what meat considered. An animal life is an animal life,
Right.
whatever, however you want to define it. Every life is a life, whether it's an insect, or a beautiful giraffe. It's just how we culturally, as different communities, interpret what is taboo and what is acceptable. In Florida, they eat alligator. In Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, they eat rodents. In Asia, they eat dogs. In certain parts of, I think, Northern America, in other countries, they eat snakes. French eat frogs. It just comes down to what's available, what is regional, and again, what is culturally acceptable, and what we. So like, what's the difference between killing a cow, killing a pig, or killing a horse? It's because somehow us in America have defined the horse as cute. We ride them; they're a status symbol. We raise our children on ponies. We invite them to birthday parties. So how can you kill the pony that was at your birthday party and eat it? But that's a narrative that we've created as Americans in our head.
Right. But conversely, because I've been asking that same question a long time myself, right? Because I'm a victim of perspective as well, right? So I've never owned a dog, but to me, killing a dog to eat is like, it's taboo to me, right? The issue is whether it should, because if I'm not mistaken, aren't pigs more intelligent than dogs? So you could say, so you could say, well, it's okay to kill a pig. It's not okay to kill a dog, but pigs are smarter than dogs, so pigs can arguably be more domesticated than a dog. There's all these things you think about, but then when you actually break it down, like you said, it's all killing an animal. All of it is killing an animal.
Dolphins are one of the most intelligent species on Earth, but we kill dolphins in order to eat fish. So we've decided that fish are okay, dolphins are cute and smart, but we're not directly going to kill the dolphins, but we're going to turn an eye. We're going to be quiet about the dolphins that are killed to subsidize the animal that we've chosen that is not intelligent. We've chosen that fish aren't intelligent. How do we know as humans the distinction between the fish's intelligence and a dolphin's intelligence? We've decided a dolphin, for some reason, because it's bigger, it has this smile that we interpret it's smiling at us, and we say, okay, well, that animal has feelings. That animal is someone that we can't kill. But we can kill a fish because it's not smiling at us,
Right. But we also decided that it was okay to enslave and package Africans as cargo. We also decided that it was okay to allow Asians to emigrate to America in order to take the jobs, the dangerous jobs that white people would not take. And those jobs that even involved machinery and weapons that we didn't want to have black people take. So these are all decisions that are arbitrary. But at the end of the day, a lot of these decisions were merely benefiting some sort of, white imperialistic tenet. But I say this all to say, our concept of history continues to develop. and expand as it's up to all of us to provide perspective and posterity for our people. And, I greatly admire your work, and I'm privileged to be able to call you a friend. I want to say thank you for being so open with me today. And I look forward to breaking bread with you soon, my brother Roy. Thank you for being here, man.
This is Roy Choi, and you're listening to Invisible Blackness.